Invitation sat on my kitchen counter for 11 days before I opened it. Not because I forgot. I knew exactly what it was. My brother's name printed in gold foil on the envelope, my mother's handwriting in the return address corner, looping and careful the way she writes when she wants something to look important. I walked past it every morning on my way to pour my coffee. I saw it every night when I set my keys down, and every single time I just left it there. I think part of me already knew that opening it would cost me something. His name is Brendan. 4 years younger than me, the kind of person who fills up a room without trying. Broad shoulders, easy laugh, the sort of confidence that comes from never once being doubted by the people who were supposed to love you most. He'd been accepted into the Mayo Clinic's Cardiovascular Surgery Fellowship, the most competitive program in the country, and our parents wanted to celebrate with a dinner at Marcello's, the Italian place in our hometown of Ashford. Ohio that they reserve for birthdays and announcements and occasions that deserve linen napkins. I finally opened the envelope on a Tuesday night after a 14-hour shift. I was still in my work clothes when I read it. My feet hurt. I had eaten half a granola bar at 2 in the afternoon and called it lunch. The card was beautiful. Thick cream paper and embossed border. My mother had clearly ordered it from somewhere. Inside, in that same careful handwriting, "We're so proud of Brendan. Please join us to celebrate his incredible achievement. Saturday the 14th, 7 p.m. That was it. No, we're glad you're coming. No, we can't wait to see you. Just the facts, the restaurant name, the time. I put the card back in the envelope and went to bed. I should tell you what I do, since it matters to the rest of this. I'm a federal judge. I was appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Ohio 18 months ago at 33 years old, which made me one of the youngest federal judges in the country at the time of my appointment. Before that, I spent 5 years as an assistant U.S. attorney, prosecuted public corruption cases, tried 2 cases that made national news. Before that, I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Michigan Law School, clerked for a 6th Circuit judge, worked 80-hour weeks at a firm in Cincinnati until I passed the bar for the Department of Justice. My parents know I'm a lawyer. They know I work for the court system. My mother told her friend Barbara once that I do something with contracts. I've stopped correcting her. There's a version of this story where I blame them for everything, where they're the villains and I'm the hero and the whole arc is clean and satisfying, but the truth is messier than that. My parents aren't cruel people. They're just people who decided a long time ago that Brendan was the story they wanted to tell. He was pre-med at 17. He won the state science fair. He called home every Sunday. He fit the shape of what they'd imagined for their children, and I had drifted so far outside that shape that I think they genuinely stopped being able to see me clearly. When I graduated from law school, they came to Ann Arbor for the ceremony. My father shook my hand and said he was proud of me. My mother took photographs. At dinner afterward, they spent 45 minutes talking about Brendan's undergraduate thesis. When I got the federal appointment, when the President of the United States nominated me and the Senate confirmed me and I stood in a courtroom and took an oath, I called to tell them. My mother said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Hey, did Brendan tell you he got into Mayo?" He had just applied. He hadn't gotten in yet. She was just warming up for this moment, I think. She'd been warming up for 18 months. I drove to Ashford on Saturday afternoon in the rain. It's 2 hours from Columbus, mostly interstate, the kind of drive that gives you too much time to think. I debated not going at all. My law clerk, a sharp 26-year-old from Cleveland who knows me better than most people, had looked at me across my desk that Friday and said, "Judge, you don't have to go to things that make you feel bad." She didn't know the details. She just knew I'd been quieter than usual all week, but I went. Because they're my parents. Because Brendan, whatever the complications of our relationship, had actually earned this. And because some part of me, I'm not proud of this part, but it's true, thought that maybe this time would be different. I wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except my watch. I didn't wear my judicial pin. I pulled my hair back. I looked like someone's younger sister, which was exactly what I was going to be for the next 3 hours, and I'd made my peace with that on the drive down. Marcello smells like garlic and old money. Dark wood paneling, candles on every table, the kind of place where the menus don't have prices because if you need to ask, you shouldn't be there. My family was already at the table when I arrived. My parents, Brendan, his girlfriend, whose name I can never remember on the first try, my Aunt Frances and her husband, and two of my parents' friends from their church, the Holloways. My mother looked up when I walked in. "You made it," she said, which is a thing she says that always sounds like mild surprise. I kissed her cheek. I shook my father's hand. I sat down in the chair that had been left at the far end of the table, slightly angled away from the center, the way you'd seat someone whose presence is appreciated but not essential. The dinner was fine for the first hour. Bread came. Wine was poured. Brennan talked about the fellowship, the structure of it, the attendings he'd be working under, a research component he was excited about. He's genuinely brilliant, my brother. Whatever else is true, that part has always been true. I listened and asked questions because I was interested and because I'm a federal judge and I know how to listen to people for long stretches of time. Then my father started talking about legacy. It wasn't directed at me. It was never directed at me. He was talking to the table the way he does when he's feeling expansive, swirling the last of his Barolo like a man who has things to say. A doctor and a lawyer in the same family, he said, and smiled, and I thought for one strange second that he was about to include me in something. "Your grandfather would have been so proud of you," he said to Brendan. "My father's father was a surgeon. It's the family mythology. The great man, the steady hands, the life given to medicine." Brendan was the continuation of that line. I understood. "And Mara?" Aunt Frances said, nodding toward me with the cheerful obliviousness of someone who doesn't know she's poking at anything. "What has she been up to? I feel like we never hear about what you're doing, sweetheart." I opened my mouth. "She works for the court system," my mother said, "the way you'd say she works at the mall. You know, legal stuff. Very steady work." My father said, which is the sound he makes when a topic is being adequately handled and he doesn't need to add to it. "What kind of legal stuff?" Aunt Frances asked. "Oh, you know, reviewing cases, I think. It's complicated." My mother reached for the bread basket. "Brendan, tell Frances about the research component." I picked up my wine glass and took a long sip. Mrs. Holloway, who had been quiet through most of dinner, leaned toward me slightly. She's in her 60s, former school teacher, the kind of woman who asks real questions. "I'm sorry, what exactly do you do, dear?" I didn't quite catch it. "I'm a U.S. District Court judge," I said. A small pause. "Oh," she said. That's very impressive." "Thank you." Across the table, my father cleared his throat. "It's an appointed position," he said. Not unkindly, the way someone explains a thing to manage expectations. "You know how those things work. Connections, political appointments." He said it the way people say things they know will land like nothing. I set my wine glass down very carefully on the tablecloth. I thought about explaining the nomination process, the background investigation, the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, the floor vote. I thought about telling him that federal judgeships are lifetime appointments, that I'd prosecuted cases that sent sitting politicians to federal prison before I was 30, that the oath I'd taken was the same oath taken by every judge in this country since the founding. I thought about all of it. Instead, I said, "You're right, there's a process," and I smiled and I reached for the bread. Because I've learned something in 18 months on the bench, in 5 years prosecuting, in the whole long education of being me in this family, you don't win by arguing. You win by waiting. The facts come out eventually. They always do. The dinner ended around 10. Hugs, goodbyes, the general feeder of a family parting. My brother walked me to my car. Brendan is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He's mostly oblivious, which is its own kind of damage, but it's not the same as cruelty. He put his hands in his pockets and said, "I'm glad you came." "I'm glad too," I said. I meant it mostly. "Mom means well," he said, which is what people say when they can't think of anything more precise. "I know she does. She just doesn't always." He stopped, shrugged. "She talks about you, you know, to her friends. I've heard her." "What does she say?" He looked at the wet parking lot. "She says you're very independent." I laughed one short sound. "That's generous." I drove home in the rain, ate cereal standing over the sink at midnight, and was at my desk by 7 the next morning. The Ohio State Bar Association holds its annual dinner in Columbus every March. It's a significant event. Judges, attorneys, law school deans, the state's legal community packed into the ballroom at the Westin, black tie, the kind of room where the work of a career gets publicly acknowledged. This year, I was receiving the Distinguished Service Award. It's given to one member of the federal judiciary per year. The selection committee is made up of Bar Association leadership, sitting appeals judges, and former recipients. I found out I'd been selected in January, and I told exactly 4 people: my law clerk, my closest friend from law school, my college roommate, and a federal colleague in Cincinnati. I hadn't told my parents, not because I was planning something. I want to be honest about that. I just hadn't gotten around to it, and then I had, and then somehow the dinner was 3 weeks away and it still hadn't come up. My mother called me 2 days before the event. She was calling to tell me about a sale at the garden center near their house, which she does sometimes, calls with information I don't need, as a way of maintaining contact. We talked about the garden center. We talked about Brendan's first week at Mayo. We talked for 11 minutes. At no point did I mention the award. I don't know exactly why. It's not that I was planning a reveal. It's not that I was withholding deliberately. I think I just stopped expecting them to care. And when you stop expecting something, you stop reaching for it. The dinner was a Thursday night in March. Cold and clear, the kind of Columbus evening where your breath makes small clouds and the city lights look sharp against the dark sky. I almost didn't notice them when I walked in. My father was at the bar with Mr. Term. Holloway, that was the first thing I processed. 2 men in tuxedos, my father's particular upright posture. Then I saw my mother at a nearby table and Aunt Frances, and I stood in the doorway of the Westin ballroom for a moment, holding my evening bag and doing a very quiet recalibration. The Holloways, it turned out, are active members of the Bar Association. Mr. Holloway had clerked for a state court judge decades ago, had friends in the legal community, had been attending this dinner for years. Of course they'd invited my parents as their guests. Of course. It's exactly the kind of thing that happens. My mother saw me across the room and smiled, and I saw the exact moment she registered that I was in a floor-length gown and not a name tag identifying me as a guest of anyone, but a small placard at the head table with my name on it, which she wouldn't be able to read from this distance. I took a breath. I went over to say hello. "What are you doing here?" my mother asked, and she meant it as a warm question. "I'm here for the dinner," I said. "Do you work with these people?" My father had turned from the bar, drink in hand. "In a manner of speaking. She means the Bar Association," Aunt Frances said helpfully. "It's a legal event, Charles." Right. My father nodded the way he nods when he's filed information in the not important enough to engage with category. "Well, it's good you're getting out. Networking is important, even when you're just reviewing cases." There was a moment, just a moment where I could have said something, where the words were right there, "Dad, I'm receiving the Distinguished Service Award tonight. They're going to call my name. You're going to watch it happen." I could have given it to them early, prepared them, made it easier for everyone. I thought of every dinner. Every she does something with contracts, every cleared throat and redirected conversation. The parking lot in the rain after Brendan's celebration dinner. She's very independent. "You're right," I said. "Networking is so important," and I excused myself to take my seat at the head table. I want to tell you about the moment, because it happened simply, which is the way the most important moments usually happen. The Bar Association president, a federal prosecutor I've known for 4 years, introduced the award at 9 o'clock. He talked about the criteria: commitment to judicial integrity, advancement of equal access to justice, service beyond the requirements of the position. He talked about the committee's decision. He used words I won't repeat because it would feel strange to write them down about myself. Then he said my name. I walked to the podium. It's maybe 40 feet from the head table to the podium in that barroom, and I was aware, in a way, I'm not usually aware of myself, of how I was moving through that room. The applause was the kind that builds, that gathers weight as it goes, people standing up from their tables. The president handing me the award, which is heavier than it looks. A glass sculpture with the seal of the Ohio State Bar Association. I gave a short speech. I thanked my clerks. I thanked the judges who'd mentored me. I mentioned a case. A housing discrimination case from 2 years ago. A family who'd waited 9 months for justice and said that they were the reason the work mattered. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Then I walked back to my seat. On my way, I passed my family's table. My mother was very still. My father had set down his drink. Aunt Frances had both hands pressed to her mouth. Mr. Holloway was looking at my father with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not unkind, not triumphant. Something more like I thought you knew. I stopped at the table because it would have been stranger not to. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then my father said, "Mara." Just my name, the way you say something when you're not sure what comes after it. "Hi, Dad." That was. He stopped. His jaw worked for a second. "You're a federal judge." "Yes. A federal judge. Not just you're not reviewing cases for someone. No." My mother reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold. She didn't say anything. She just held on and I let her. Because whatever else is true, she's my mother, and this is what complicated love looks like. It's not one thing. It's everything at once. The pride and the grief and the years of small erasures and the hand reaching across the table trying to take back something it can't quite name. "How long?" she finally asked. 18 months on the bench. Before that, 5 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Before that, I paused. A while. Aunt Frances made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. Mr. Holloway stood up and extended his hand. "We owe you a proper congratulations," he said, "an overdue one." "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you were here." "I'm glad you were here." I went back to the head table. I stayed until 10:30, talked to colleagues, thanked people who came by to say kind things. My parents stayed too. I could see them from where I was sitting. My father very quiet, my mother leaning in toward Aunt Frances saying something I couldn't hear. At 10:30, I got my coat from the coat check and found them near the exit. My father hugged me. He's not a man who hugs easily, and it was the slightly awkward, slightly too long kind of hug that men give when they're trying to apologize without having to say the word. I let him. "I didn't know," he said into the space above my shoulder. "I know. I should have asked more questions." I stepped back and looked at him. My father, 61 years old, still upright, still that particular posture that used to make me feel like I was always standing at a slight angle to him. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not diminished, just human-sized. The way people look when you finally see them clearly. "You can ask them now," I said. "It's been 4 months since the Bar Association dinner. Things are not entirely different. I don't want to wrap this up in a bow that isn't there. My mother still calls about garden center sales. My father still doesn't fully understand what a federal judge does, though he's trying. He bought a book about the U.S. court system, which his friend Barbara told me when she ran into me at the grocery store in Ashford, which made me laugh so hard I had to put down a cantaloupe. He hasn't given me the book. He's just reading it. By himself. Because he's my father, and my father does not ask for help. But things are different in the ways that matter. He calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but most of them. My mother asked me last month, unprompted, what case I was most proud of from my time at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I told her about a wire fraud case, a financial scheme that had taken 3 years to build and had returned $4.2 million to retirees who'd been defrauded by someone they'd trusted. She listened all the way through. She asked one question. A good one. It wasn't everything, but it was something real. Brendan called me after he heard what happened at the dinner. Aunt Frances told him, inevitably. He said, "I feel like an idiot." And I said, "You're not an idiot, you just weren't paying attention." And he laughed and said, "That's basically the same thing, and I thought maybe we were going to be okay." I keep the award on the bookshelf in my chambers, between a copy of the Federal Rules of Evidence and a photograph from my clerkship. It's not the first thing you see when you walk in. It's not the point of the room. I don't need it to be the point. I've sat on that bench for 18 months and watched people stand in my courtroom, people who came to the law at the end of their rope, people who had been waiting years for someone to listen, people who needed the system to see them clearly even when no one else had. I do the job because the job is the point. Because somewhere out there is a family in a house they shouldn't have been able to lose, and they didn't lose it, and that's a thing that happened in the world and will continue to be true, regardless of whether my parents knew to be proud of it. The glass sculpture catches the light in the afternoons. Sometimes I notice it. Sometimes I don't. Both are fine. I've thought a lot about why I didn't tell them. Not just about the award. About any of it. The appointment, the cases, the years of work that built into something real and permanent. I've asked myself whether I was protecting myself or punishing them. And the honest answer is, I'm not entirely sure those are different things. What I know is that silence, held long enough, becomes its own kind of statement. Not a cruel one, necessarily. Just a true one. What happened at the West in that March wasn't something I planned. I didn't orchestrate it. I didn't call Aunt Frances and arrange for my parents to be in that ballroom so they could watch my name get called. Life just did what it does. It kept moving, and eventually all the pieces were in the same room at the same time, and the truth landed the way truth eventually lands, without drama, without a speech, without any of the confrontation I'd always half imagined and never actually wanted. My father said I should have asked more questions. That stayed with me. Not because it's the apology I'd spent years imagining, but because it's the most honest thing I've heard him say. He didn't try to rewrite what had happened. He didn't explain it away. He just named the failure plainly in the parking garage of a hotel in his tuxedo at 61 years old. That took something from him. I could see it cost him. There's a thing I've watched happen in my courtroom over and over with people who've been wronged and people who've done the wronging. The ones who carry it the worst aren't always the ones who were hurt. Sometimes it's the ones who finally understand what they did and have to sit with that understanding and figure out what to do with it. My father is going to be sitting with something for a while. I think he knows that. I think that's why he bought the book. I used to believe that being seen was something you earned, that if you worked hard enough, built enough, proved enough, the people who mattered would eventually turn around and recognize what was standing right in front of them. I don't think that anymore. Some people turn around. Some people don't. The work has to matter regardless. What I've learned, not from a book, not from a mentor, but from the long, unglamorous process of actually building a life, is that integrity is mostly invisible. It accumulates in private. The years I spent at the U.S. Attorney's office, building cases no one in my family knew about, going home to my apartment and starting again the next morning. None of that was visible. None of it was celebrated. It just was. And it turned into something anyway. That's the part nobody tells you when you're starting out. You don't get credit while you're doing the work. You get credit later, sometimes from strangers in rooms your family didn't know you'd be in. And by then, if you've done it right, you don't need the credit the way you thought you would. You just need the work to have been real. Mine was real. It still is. That's enough.